To this session of Wales Tech Week. And the session we're looking at now is Manufacturing Our Future. We've got a lineup of panelists here on the screen, but actually we're going to start off with a video from Warren East, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Rolls-Royce.
Hello, my name is Warren East. I'm CEO of Rolls-Royce, and I'm going to talk for a little while about the future of manufacturing. Now, why me? Well, I'm lucky enough, as I said, to work for Rolls-Royce. We are a leading industrial technology company. Manufacturing is a big part of what we do, and the products that we make themselves are very sophisticated systems deploying lots of manufacturing technology. Much of our manufacturing is in the UK, and we have a very UK-biased supply chain. And we invest a lot in manufacturing technology to improve the competitiveness of our products. Also, I've worked in the tech sector for nearly 40 years. 3/4 of that was in the semiconductor industry. And if ever there was a sector which has shown such change and progress and impacted so many people over that time, it's semiconductors. That progress has been largely enabled by innovation in the manufacture of the semiconductors themselves. So this is a personal view. It's based on my experience, and it's not necessarily a Rolls-Royce view. So to start with, why should we care? Well, if I look at the absolute value, take a UK perspective, the absolute value of manufacturing is about 10% of our economy. Look at that through an export lens, and it's about 50% of our exports. Manufacturing businesses themselves invest 75% of our R&D, and manufacturing businesses drive productivity. There are societal benefits too. National pride, security, and it drives an innovative climate in which to do business, and so therefore fuels other sectors. Now, the popular impression is very different from reality. Popular impression would have it that manufacturing is a sector in decline. It's been declining for decades, and that's set to continue. Wrong. Just look at semiconductors. All these other sectors which are replacing manufacturing are enabled to a greater or lesser extent by semiconductors. And I will argue that manufacturing too is enabled by advances in semiconductors and computing. The reality is we've had decades of innovation, and that has driven scale. Computing power makes the products that we all build more intelligent, and this in itself can lead to simpler physical products. Take an example of a fuel injector from one of the large engines that we make for ships and trains. It's a complex mechanical system, and that complex mechanical system is now computer controlled. The functionality is in software, not a bunch of interconnected springs, and so the physical product itself is much simpler to make. Fewer people are involved in the manufacturing part. More people are employed in writing the software. But if we didn't manufacture the injector at all, the software programmer would be unemployed. Another example might be electric vehicles, where an electric vehicle simply has far fewer components than its internal combustion engine equivalent. The reality is that manufacturing employs a smaller proportion of the population. As well as having physically simpler products that we're making, the big driver of this is automation. It's been a real change, and there are now fewer manual jobs than there used to be. Look at Rolls-Royce. The components in one of our engines. What we're effectively doing is taking a chunk of metal and cutting bits off it to make a specific shape. And we used to do that by employing lots and lots of people to do it fairly manually. Then along came 2D machines, and then came 3D machines, and then we added more automation. And now we're able to produce these products in a completely repeatable way. And that drives quality. And the same machine can be used for different components just by changing the software, a different recipe if you like. And then we can couple machines to several other machines and create whole production lines, in fact whole factories, and machine learning and artificial intelligence is now applied at that system level. And a whole factory, even a network of factories, effectively becomes one big optimized computer-controlled machine. Now, enabling technologies are not just the compute power, but of course in things like the sensing. Sensing gets more sophisticated, for example, so mechanical measurements become optical ones, where the machine is effectively seeing like you or I see and measures accordingly. And all of that is enabled by more compute power, whether it's at the sensor or at the heart of the machine. Now, what does this mean for businesses and for economies? And of course, today we must think particularly what does it mean for the UK and for Wales? Well, over the last 50 years or so, manufacturing has grown significantly in Southeast Asia, and a term that's been widely used is low-cost manufacturing countries. And that phrase, of course, has been driven by, and indeed the rise of manufacturing in that region has been driven by the comparative advantage of lower labour cost. But wages have increased there, and automation has, of course, happened there as well. And so the comparative advantage is disappearing. Progress in automation now is happening faster than ever, and so this comparative advantage is going away faster. The playing field is becoming more level. Now, here in the UK and in other so-called high-cost countries, there is a fantastic opportunity in the levelling of the playing field. It doesn't mean, of course, that we will win and manufacturing will automatically shift back to those countries, but it does mean that we have an opportunity to compete. And the weapons we have now are skills and innovation, and that's where we need to invest and get competing. The green agenda presents further opportunity, and that's an opportunity to make new things. For instance, at Rolls-Royce, we're very excited about the potential for SMRs, small modular nuclear reactors, as part of the solution to generate enough zero carbon electricity to power all those electric vehicles that we're going to have, to manufacture enough truly green hydrogen to enable the hydrogen economy, and so on. Such SMRs, of course, are also an ideal opportunity to exploit exceedingly high levels of automation and technology deployment in the manufacturing thereof. We can make components that just simply would not have been possible 50 years ago. In the UK, the government talks about levelling up. And this opportunity that I've described is really just global scale levelling up. And for Wales, we need to capitalise on that just as much as we do elsewhere in the UK. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, really good to hear from Warren East, and I know he spends quite a lot of time in Wales. It's a place dear to his heart, so it's significant that he joined us today. I just realised I didn't introduce myself. So I'm Katherine Bennett. I'm the Chief Executive of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. I've been in the post 7 days, so bear with me. But before this position, I was a Senior Executive at Airbus. I was there 16 years. So I'm now going to move to our next session of this panel. And I have the honour of introducing Andrew Peters, who is the Managing Director of Siemens Digital Industries. And Andrew has got a presentation for us, and then we're going to have a wider discussion. So over to you, Andrew.
Oh, thanks, Katherine, and really delighted to be presenting to everybody today. Hope you can hear me okay. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. And I want to share with you in the next 30 minutes 3 sort of main topic areas. Firstly, I'll start with some general perspectives of global manufacturing, really building on what Warren has just talked about. Then I want to tell you a little bit about the business that I lead in Congleton, which is not immediately known, I'm sure, to everybody, but it's about 30 miles away from the Welsh border, South Manchester way. And in Congleton, we've been working with not just Welsh government, but we've been working with Welsh innovation in the phase of the high value manufacturing catapult in the Northwest in Broughton, which with Katherine actually has just started to lead. So tell you a bit about Congleton, and then last but not least, I'll try and bring out a few examples of the innovation that we've completed in Congleton over the last 5 years. So hope you enjoy the presentation, and just to start and position my presentation, a lot of discussion and presentation and events like this actually over the last 5 years, talking about the transition from what some people call Industry 4. If you're in America on this this call, you might think of it as IoT, Internet of Things, but it's essentially how we move to more fully optimized and efficient processes. And what I have reflected over, my last 30 years, but particularly the last few years working for Siemens, we have globally over 250 factories. What we're seeing very much is a move to get closer to our customers. And what this means from a manufacturing demographic point of view is we're starting to see very often multiple locations, different factories making the same products, because the key driver is making those products local to that customer base. And one of, therefore, the drivers that I see very strongly is not just the optimization of individual locations, but how different locations can collaborate, and that really drives the digitalization and connected information topic. The next one, and this is quite quite opinionated view really from myself, but if you think about the de facto historic view of products, you'll get the view that some people have presented in the business schools of you've got high volume, low complexity, and low complexity, high volume, and you shouldn't mix the two. Well, what we're actually seeing certainly in discrete manufacturing is that some customers genuinely do see the products that they're buying from, in our case, Siemens, as commodity, but other customers who are buying that very same product group might be demanding more what I would call customized or configured type products. So the days of just being really efficient with a very limited product range, I think they're still there for many companies, but I can definitely see that starting to change really quickly. Certainly in the business that I'm going to tell you about in Congleton, we made the move 5 years ago to move to customized and configured products, because we were just getting so many requirements from our customers to say, if you could just change, sometimes not even the product, the packaging, which is of course part of the product, but if you've spent a long time leaning your operations, that can be quite challenging. So I've called it adaptable and flexible processes is the second manufacturing trend, if you like, that I'm seeing. And then last but not least, a strong view I have is that many organizations have gone on a lean journey over the last decade or even longer. And with the advent of the Industry 4, some companies think that there's a paradigm shift. And what I actually see is that digitalization and automation is an extension of lean, if you like, using digital technologies to become even more lean and efficient. So they would be my real takeaways. And I don't think COVID or the uncertainties we've seen in the last 18 months have necessarily changed these. I think they've probably just accelerated them. Just a word about productivity. Again, many organizations, as Warren said, are fighting on this global playing field, and Wales and the UK is no different. And Warren's quite correct in when he says that with the advent of automation and digitalization, the playing fields are getting even closer to be leveling up, especially as costs are going up. What I wanted to sort of share in this graphic is what we're seeing is you're starting to run out of road if you're an organization that is basing its productivity and its efficiency purely on sort of traditional lean Kaizen approaches, if you like. So they've been really valuable, and they continue to be very valuable, but you do run out of road. So the advent of bringing in digitalisation and automation to help fill that productivity gap is a really important one. And then just to, if you like, this is not a very complicated slide, but these 3 bullet points are really important, in my opinion, from the learnings that I've made over the last 10 years or so. And the first one I've called design for automation. And what I see a lot of companies globally doing is thinking about automation, digitalization as compartmentalized to manufacturing. So in other words, not necessarily looking at the product design. And we can go back 50 years, and you can, if any academics on this particular conference session, you're interested, if you go back to papers by Lucas and Boothroyd and Dewhurst, they were talking about how you design products which are then suitable for simple and smart manufacturing and bringing automation. So we spent a lot of time in Siemens bringing design and manufacturing close together. And as I say, I reckon about 75% of the ability to automate a product efficiently, sure you can do it inefficiently, is in the design. And I think that's a big learning that I've made over the last number of years. The second point, and I'll be honest, I see this everywhere I go, and this is all about what I've called digitalizing and automating a bad process. So it's still incumbent upon companies, and there's huge opportunity globally to do this, to first lean and develop a good process and then digitalize and automate it. Too often I see companies investing, alarming amounts of money into a technology, and then they find that the solution, whether that's an ERP solution or a CRM solution or whatever solution they've digitalized, is not what they wanted. And then there's a bit of a discussion as to how they can get out of it, because it's not what they signed up for. So I'd really guide this link of automation and digitalization to really efficient processes. That's been a big learning, and I've made a number of mistakes to get that learning. And then last but not least, I would say many organizations, and we in Siemens are certainly right in the middle of this. Warren talked about electronics, and as we speak, there'll be many on the call globally who are really challenged by the global supply shortages, whether that be pure electronic components or wider products. It's a really challenging time for everybody. But if you do want to make transformation, and you do want to do it without bringing your business at risk, then my big strong recommendation is to use agile, fast sort of experiments, if you like, where you can try things. One of my learnings over the last 15 years is sort of traditional approaches of leadership, where if something doesn't work, it can only be because you didn't think smart enough and you didn't manage it well enough. That of course may have stood in the past, but now when we're getting into complex projects and technologies, the solution isn't known very often. So it's about iteration, and it's about sand pit environments and the high value manufacturing catapults. And I say we've got a great one in North Wales in Broughton, but there are other catapults in the UK. I think make Wales and the UK really ideally positioned for companies who are just not sure how to take these first steps. I get lots of companies come to me and say we've been asked to go on a digitalization journey, and we're just we're not sure what to do. And my guidance to all of those companies is to start small and to start away from your day job and create some experiments where you can get some learning, build confidence. And as I say, not because Katherine's on the call, but the high value manufacturing catapults are just an excellent way to do that. So that's my first sort of review of global manufacturing trends. I now want to sort of take you into Congleton, and you can see from this picture that Congleton is probably like many SMEs on the call. It's a location that's been established of 50 years actually this year, And you can see on the graphic there that we're bounded by other manufacturing locations. So we've had that challenge of productivity whenever we've been asked to do more. The exam question for us has always been, how do we fit it in the same footprint? And when you look with hindsight, that's been fantastic. And if you sort of ask, how do organisations and locations like Congleton establish? Quite often, most of the time, and we were no different, it's to do with some sort of R&D technology work. And in the case of Siemens Congleton, we were, if you like, the inventors of what we call military broadband back in the 80s. And we've the products that we make today, we started to make in 1991. So we're 500 people. So yes, we're a large SME, but I hope some of the examples I'm now going to take you through, really give you a good view of what other SMEs could do in this particular space. The only picture you're going to see from me today is on the left there. Those little black boxes with some dials on. They're the products that we make. They're rather important because they control the speed of electric motors, which then control applications like pumps and fans. But what we've got in Congleton is we've got not just the manufacturing that you can see there, but we've also got design capability and also technical support. A couple of the applications that we use our products on. So if you eventually do find yourself going on holiday, bottom left there, you can see a baggage handling system. And our black boxes will control the speed of an electric motor, which might be connected to a gearbox, which would control, in this case, the speed of that baggage handling system. Or in the top right there, there's a water pumps that, if you wanted to vary the flow of water. So in terms of the journey that Congleton went on, back in 2010, we went first of all for the lean approach. So introducing value streams, making the processes very efficient, taking away waste. The classic 94% of all processes are waste. So it was continuous improvement using a lot of Kaizen techniques. Virtually everything we did was learned from best practice sharing. So pinch with pride, we call it in Siemens. And then because of the global situation, where again Warren quite rightly said that there is a race, if you like, between Asia and Europe, we often get asked the question. My stakeholders in Germany very often ask me the question, why are we making products in Siemens Congleton? And of course the answer is we're doing it because we're able to deliver world-class productivity. But if we weren't able to do that, there could be easy decisions made about relocating the products that we make perhaps to Asia or somewhere else. So in 2015, we set the target of becoming world-class in lean and driving efficiency. And it was about that time when I talked in my introduction, we had the small problem that some customers said, well, we like your products, but I had one customer in Sheffield, I don't know if they're on the call, but they said to me, Andrew, if you could just set up this drive, we only use 3 parameters of the 200 parameters. If you could just set that up for us and send it to us, our chap who wires these products in wouldn't have to parameterize that product. So, that would be great value for us. And one other thing, if you could just stop sending us every drive in a cardboard box, because we take all these cardboard boxes and put them in a skip together with the instructions. So if you could just put them in a tray and every week and send them to us, we'd have huge value as your customer. So coming into an organization like Congleton, where we'd leaned it within an inch of its life and then started to get these requests for non-standards, if you like, we then made the decision that we were going to go all in and try and master what we'd call this topic of complexity or customization. And this is what the graphic on the right-hand side and what we spent the last 5 years doing. We're not quite there, but we've achieved an awful lot, which I'll tell you about shortly. Our challenge, though, was this graphic. It wasn't just about driving cost and efficiency. There are many companies, perhaps on the call, but there are very notable companies that have recognised that if you just focus on costs, so the graphic on the right, sorry, it doesn't take you to a good place. It drives your cost down, but it doesn't take your business to a good place. So you do need a portfolio that is the customer's desire. And we in Congleton had been quite weak on that innovation side. So our product wasn't a Nokia phone, but I used that picture just to show that you can be world class in using manufacturing technologies, but you still need a product that customers want and add value. So the journey that we went on was twofold. It was becoming flexible and adaptive and continuing to be really efficient with our costs, but also at the same time bringing out new products that were innovative and, in our case, addressing that manufacturing trend of becoming not just commodity but also being customized. So for those on the call who are interested, we moved from a product portfolio of 800 catalog numbers. This was our previous product portfolio, to now a configured range with over 50,000 variations. So I can tell you, you need to get good with your digital systems, which I'll show you about shortly. But before I go into that, some of the, I'll call it the enablers that make organizations able to cope with transformation, in my experience, come in the general guise of people, culture, and leadership. And it's no different in Siemens Congleton. If you want to make great things happen, then you need to create an organization and a leadership that supports change. And in our case, you can see on the graphic, we had some really important, I'll call it, ingredients to our culture. So bottom right, the burning platform I talked about. The left middle, you can see the local area and family ties. So we had a really supportive workforce. Congleton is a market town, 28,000 people, mainly a commuter town for Manchester. So it's the biggest employer in Congleton, and therefore really important. So with that, we created what we called an ownership culture, where everybody acts as if it was their own company. And we spent, a number of years creating an environment where the environment itself dictates the behaviors that you want. This isn't about top down. This is about creating an environment. And when we've created that environment, what we then needed to do is really work on the skills. And I show you this example not because this was unique to Congleton. We actually copied this from a company in Germany where we called it a factory within a factory. So this is the junior factory. So the people that you can see on this picture here, they set up their own company. So MD, FD, organizational structure. And the idea of the work we've done in Congleton over the last few years, and we continue to do, is if you think of every piece of deployment as an opportunity, not just, as many companies do, to put their best people on to get the best results, but if you think about that deployment as an opportunity for problems to work on people, over a period of time, if you do this systematically between 5 and 7 years, you can create a learning environment and a skills environment that is difficult to copy and incredibly difficult to replicate. So what we do in Siemens Congleton when we're setting out team for the big challenges and the innovation opportunities, at least 50% of what we're doing is thinking about the development opportunity to develop the new skills that we need for the future. And this is, I think, a neat example. But then moving on to the examples that I talked about, I did want to just make another pitch for any companies on the call. We've got fantastic innovation centres in Wales and also the UK. When we started our automation and digitalisation journey, and it coincided with that move from standard products to configured and customised, it wasn't enough to just have people learning on the job. We needed more expertise, and I can tell you these innovation centres, they've got the best equipment. You know, SMEs couldn't afford to start and make all the investments in this, and they've got great technology and people. So you can also get superb leverage funding where you can make a partial contribution. So the graphic in the middle there, where you can see all of the items that go to make a Siemens variable speed drive. This is the product I described earlier. Our challenge was, well, how do we go about trying to automate that? If you go around the world, what you find is most robots and automation are doing standard. If it's whether it's cars or aerospace, the intricate parts of it are still very much extensively done by humans. So what we wanted to do is take that step into quite complex, discrete automation. So you can see there on the left-hand side, that's a picture of Katherine. I'm not sure if it's day 1 or day 2, but it's early days at the North Wales Catapult Centre, where they've got these great facilities. So just moving on to some examples then. So this is our product portfolio, and our challenge was, well, how do we start to automate and bring in robotics to allow us to do this? And the answer that we came up with through living it and learning was, it wasn't a focus on guidelines and lots of endless rules. It was very much a focus on having a culture and a set of tools and methodologies, and then bringing collaboration together. And I've just put on this slide some very simple designs that show you, when you're designing something like a cover for one of our products, large flat surfaces for vacuum gripping, or detailed surface positioning are really important. Adding in additional features supplied by the part, or chamfered edges, where if you're trying to bring a cover together, a human can put a cover together very easily. A robot finds it much more difficult because of its tolerances. So building in chamfered edges makes it more easy to do this. So there's a whole sort of plethora of experience we've gained on designing products which make it sympathetic to advanced manufacturing. And I see quite a lot of organizations not doing that. They take the products that they've got and then they say, how do we automate it? It makes it quite challenging. Another example I wanted to show you is this is one of our end-of-line boxing applications. And I show you this investment value for one main reason. The 88K was an all-in investment that we made, and it was made to drive productivity and allow us to take out 2 operators that were doing this manually at a cost of around 25,000, so 50,000 payback, if you like, so about 18 months payback. Now I can tell you, we went to the open market to get quotes for this type of application, and you're talking about £500,000 to deliver this. So what we realized early on in our journey is that the approach to bringing in automation, whether it's using simulation, digital twin, as you can see in there, that's largely not existing in the globe. There's really good examples of it in Wales and the UK, but it's not widespread, if I'm honest. So the biggest opportunity, I think, for organizations, maybe for SMEs or integrators, or even end users who are starting to go on this journey, is to recognize that the ROIs are still challenging if you do this in a traditional way, which is quite iterative. And you put in a robot, you try it, it doesn't work, you try it again. Whereas using some of the digital tools have allowed us to start to make productivity gains, like you can see here, and you can see on the bottom left there starting to use additive manufacture for end effector design. So we'd be waiting maybe a month in the past to go out to an organization that can make us an end effector. Now we've got our apprentices and they can knock up an end effector in a few hours. So starting to look at the new innovations in a way that gives you real value. Just turning to the production planning of the organization, in the past, this would be spreadsheets and Excel charts and people with lots of knowledge. But now when we're saying that, in principle, we can take any order from any customer to any value, and we're saying it's not all about getting a brilliant forecast, because in a VUCA world, that's really difficult. Yes, you want to continue to work on your forecasting, but actually, the thing that's going to separate the world-class manufacturers from those who are on the road is their ability to be flexible and to respond, and having connected data, whether that's in the form of, you can see on the top left, understanding your capacity through a cell, or it's bottom left where you can play around with the variables, was really important for us. And as I say, in the past, this was very much a spreadsheet exercise, and I see that there today. So I think this is a big opportunity for companies. This next slide, quite a complicated slide, but if you bear with me, when we make production changes in Siemens Congleton, traditionally we would use what's called an LCD process, where you can see top left, we would do maybe some Sankey diagrams of movements. We would then run physical workshops. You can't quite see it, but they would typically take the form of physical mock-ups from cardboard, hand-drawn items. We'd build the workstations, and then we'd try it out. And typically we might end up with, if you're building a house, you could have maybe 50 snags. Then taking the digital tools approach and looking to add value, we were able to replicate that process. We didn't do it overnight by getting rid of all the top stuff. We integrated it because all of these workshops are, we include our operators from the shop floor. So we want the people who know best to be in these workshops. And I think Katherine would have some experience with this. We used this to a very successful conclusion 12 months ago, actually, just over 12 months, in the big challenge for the UK, the ventilator challenge. And we delivered this at the Broughton site together with the fantastic team of Airbus. But the point here is, again, using these digital tools, we were able to reduce the time to make these new manufacturing cells, but we were also able to reduce the final snags. It's not shown on this list, but instead of 50 or so, we'd be typically identifying maybe 7 or 8 final snags. So getting it right first time and investing in these digital tools and mixing those tools with the manufacturing methodologies, that's where I would say the magic starts to happen. And it's in organizations like Siemens and Rolls-Royce and others, finding environments where you can start to build teams that share the manufacturing methodologies with the digital tools is a really big opportunity. And anybody on the call who's more interested in how you go about doing this, happy to share offline. And my final comments now, one of the misconceptions I've seen with various organizations, not a criticism, but what I see is that if you take a robot, for example, quite often the focus is on the robot itself, and actually the robot is only 30% of the challenge. 30% of the challenge and cost is the end effector design. But as you can see on the right, you've got to tell the robot what information it needs. So what I find in the general sort of sphere of manufacturing at the moment is there's very much a point solution approach to automation and robotics, where people take an opportunity and automate that. The bigger opportunities, it's challenging though, is to holistically look at your end-to-end processes. As I say in that early first section, don't digitalize them until you can get a a good process. And then what I've tried to show on the right, and I know Rolls-Royce and Airbus are, well down the road on this, is to create an integrated, seamless data solution. And again, on the call, if you're an organization where you still have paper on your shop floor, that red line on the right-hand side there, that is a big opportunity, I think, to drive value by trying to connect your shop floor and your IT systems. It's a bit of a challenge, but when you can do that, what you start to release is some of the automation solutions that you can see on the left there, whether that be robots or automated guided vehicles or authoring of digital work instructions without paper. And the left there, that's our solution that we've used to create that connection, if you like. And last but not least, to conclude, even we're in COVID times, be very honest with you, I don't think there's very much we've done in Congleton that's unique. What I would say is most of what we've done is learnt from others and then brought it in to the environment in Congleton. So we've created a virtual tour of Siemens Congleton that we try to bring customers, even in these COVID times, to Congleton and give them a feel for what we're doing. So if any of you on the call are interested, again, if you can connect with me offline, I'd be happy to share what we've been doing. So from my side, thank you for listening, and look forward to take any questions in the next few minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. You've managed to include a lot of information in that presentation, and I could listen to you for hours, I have to say.
Oh, thank you.
And even a bit embarrassed to see that photograph of myself, yes, visiting AMRC Cymru, which we're very proud of that facility as part of the high value manufacturing catapult set up in 2019 with the support from the Welsh government. And, I love the picture you had of the Nokia phone. It's amazing how the technology has moved on. So you look at that handset, and also really interested to see about the initiatives such as the Junior Factory and the really big focus you've got on people at Siemens. Just before joining this panel, actually, I was also talking about the ventilator challenge, and I talked about the collaboration between Siemens and Airbus up in North Wales. And I know that's continuing, isn't it? It wasn't just on that amazing project. You think that we built 1,500 ventilators for the NHS in a week, when usually the ventilator manufacturers were doing 50 to 60 a week. It's incredible what collaboration can do. So thank you so much, and we'll bring you in a minute. I'm delighted to also be joined today by Nick Reeks, who's the Director of IT Vendor Management at Tata Steel Europe, and also Barry Maybank, the Senior Director UK, Ireland and Europe for Avanade. I hope I pronounced that right. Barry also used to work in my organisation at the Manufacturing Technology Centre, and I know brings a huge experience. So perhaps I could pass over to Nick, maybe some reflections on what we've heard from Warren and Andrew. And I know a big focus for Tata is dealing with pace in a big company such as yours. And I wondered if you'd like to comment on that, Nick.
Okay, thanks very much, Catherine, and very happy to be on the panel this morning. A great presentation from Andrew, and also some great comments from Warren.
Could you turn up your sound a little? It's a bit quiet, if that's okay. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. You can hear me now, okay?
A little bit more would be good, but otherwise keep going.
Fine. Warren touched on a lot of macro themes, I think, and he talked about competitiveness and security of supply chains, and how manufacturing is enabled by tech. I guess in the steel industry, where we've been running for probably a couple of 100 years now, technology and change has actually been a feature of our industry over centuries, not just over the last decade or so. And the shift that we've seen now in the last 10 years is dwarfed probably by the challenge of decarbonisation and the whole sustainability piece, which is the next kind of technology shift that we're going to see in our sector. And all of the things that Andrew talked about, all of the digital capabilities, all of the efficiency capabilities, all of those are going to contribute to our solution for decarbonisation, because it won't be just one thing that supports us in that goal. It was interesting that Warren talked about fewer physical labour elements and in manufacturing, and that's a reality, of course, that Tata Steel, British Steel, Chorus, throughout our history has seen. And Andrew talked about some automation to replace people in the process, etc. I think in our sector, it really is shifting now to brains over brawn that we need in manufacturing to drive the next generational shift that we see that's essential for manufacturing. And I was really positive to hear Warren talk about just how important manufacturing is. I can recall when I was leaving university and making a choice between the finance sector and manufacturing. I studied at Sheffield, so I guess I was destined for the steel industry in many ways. But my final year in studying manufacturing and operations completely swung me away from anything in finance, because of the hands-on nature of it, and the fact that it touched so many people's lives as well. And steel itself is in so many sectors that, like Warren was talking about semiconductors, the same for steel. We're in cars, we're in buildings, we're in ships, we're in lighting. It's huge kind of thing. There were a few things Andrew talked about. Most of that we can recognize. The design for automation, live the lean debate. I can remember Total Quality Program being launched in the 90s in my organization, and there's been that cycle: total quality to lean to agile to digital, and we'll come on and talk about some of the digital work in our company shortly, no doubt. But yeah, when you talked about the continuous improvement journey, totally recognize that. And what I think we're seeing now is the digital piece speeding up the transparency of operations, and it's not just that it speeds it up in a sense, but it becomes more obvious. So Andrew talked about kind of don't digitize a bad process kind of thing, but sometimes you can do that because the process is always going to be suboptimal, but the digitalization piece means you just go ahead and do it, and then you can iterate with above and beyond that. We recently launched a safety app, and then which allowed people to our site and our employees to see safety rules, to see where the local assembly point would be, to see where defibrillators would be. And what we then realized was that, okay, that had been developed on a corporate standard, which was iOS at the time. We needed to then switch that so we had it more widely available for Android users as well, so because we wanted to include more people that were coming onto site. So we could iterate that, and then we could continue to improve it. And I think, Andrew, sometimes the digital process can allow you that little bit of flexibility, that the underlying process may not be entirely perfect, but you may not need to make it entirely brilliant before you launch. And to your point, Katherine, about pace, I think that's where we start to see the pace piece come in terms of how you get delivery of some of these things. You mentioned quite a lot of things about leadership to support change. Our group CIO was speaking in India just last week, and he talked about the digital mindset, and that's something that's from the very top within Tata Steel. Tata Steel is a World Economic Forum lighthouse company for data and analytics in a number of our locations, and including in Europe, and that whole kind of high top level buy-in is absolutely central to that whole digital mindset, and we've seen that shift in Tata Steel particularly over the last 2 to 3 years, where IT is less about kind of those guys over there and more about how do we do these things, how do we do analytics, how do we use these capabilities, what is a digital twin, and those questions are being asked without fear. Katherine, I think you talked previously in one of our pre-sessions about how people can ask the right questions, etc. And in India, one of the tricks that was deployed was actually using kind of young graduates as mentors to senior leaders. to allow those senior leaders to ask the questions that they possibly didn't want to ask in public, kind of thing. So getting that senior leadership talking about digital, talking about the transformation piece, that has all been something that we've seen and is crucial to our future position as well. And to support that, obviously we've got learning centres. We've got a learning centre at Port Talbot, innovation centre at Shotton, strong connections to the universities, Swansea and Warwick Manufacturing Centre in particular. So that allows you to give the kind of diversity as well that you don't necessarily get within the organisation. To be controversial, I was slightly challenged by Andrew's point about the automation point with the cardboard boxes and how he did that and how the ROI was calculated. It was trying to calculate ROI on the people. I think a lot of our automation over the years has been driven more by safety, perhaps, and I'm sure the same is true for you, Andrew, as well. But overtly, what we've been trying to do is to take people further away from the process. It is an inherently kind of, it's a very large-scale live process. If you drive by Port Talbot, you'll see how large it is. If you go past the Celsa steelworks at the time when they're charging, you can actually hear, even from in the car, you can hear the charging going on with the scrap recycling. So we've tried to move people further away, and that's what's driven our automation, remote monitoring, and all those kind of things. So our first issue is more about the safety, and then, okay, where does it come then for the cost and the ROI piece? So I'm sure that's the same at Siemens, Andrew, but it caught my attention in terms of one of the themes that we've got with our automation. Maybe just to tie up, and Katherine, let the others come in. You asked about kind of pace and transformation. One of the underlying features and programs we've been running in the UK is called Unleash and Engage, which has really been set up to facilitate the shift to agile. So training team members in more agile ways of working, letting people understand the concept of agile as it applies not just to technology or software development, but as it applies to the daily job. So, we're actually, although we're in a very large continuous manufacturing operation 24/7, the cycle of shift meetings, morning meetings, daily reviews, weekly reviews, outputs, etc., reviews, all those pieces fit very well into stable manufacturing in terms of the disciplines. And then we're facilitating that either, there is some paper on boards because it's much faster kind of thing. And then increasingly what you're seeing is the tools that we have, such as Office 365 and the Azure data and analytics platforms, all those, and the IoT monitoring, all those being fed in so people see more and more electronic views to support the daily standards. So sorry, Katherine, it's probably a lot to reflect on, but there was a lot between Andrew and Warren that was similar, and one or two things that may be slightly different.
Thank you, Nick. You've brought in a lot of examples from Tata as well, which I'm very intrigued about the cultural differences as well between different nations. And Andrew quite rightly reminded us that this is a global audience we're talking to today. So thank you for bringing that in. I'd like to turn to Barry now. And by the way, people listening in, if you wish to ask any questions, you'll have to do it through the comments section on the right-hand side of your screen. So do feel free to put some comments in there, and we'll try and get to the questions towards the end. I'm now going to turn to Barry. In terms of your career so far, Barry, and your current role, I'd obviously be interested to hear your reflections on presentations we just heard, and also I know you're keen to maybe look ahead a bit, look at some of the other trends coming down the road.
Yeah, listen, thank you, Katherine, and absolutely, I was at the high-value manufacturing catapult until very recently, actually, as Chief Digital Officer at the MTC. Joined Avanade, and we're part of Accenture and the Microsoft ecosystem, so really looking at driving the adoption of technologies into manufacturing and rapid adoption as well. Really interesting chats from Andrew and Nick and Warren as well. So, absolutely kind of amplifying the sort of trends, if you like, in manufacturing. Driven by that technology adoption, in particular data and digital interventions, kind of coupled with the more traditional operational technologies. I think manufacturing has always been really sort of lagging behind a little bit in terms of maturity. If you think of some of the industries where Maybe customer experience has been the sort of key driver. They've been kind of at the forefront of innovation. But I think it's really pivotal times for manufacturing, kind of echoing what Andrew was saying, really super interesting times with the changes in sort of product design and intelligence, and the intelligence in terms of how we produce things and make things. So my experience is really kind of coupled across the high value manufacturing catapult and in my current role as well, and working kind of cross sector from SMEs, mid-cap and large organizations. I sort of categorize it in sort of three areas really. So there's a sort of workplace aspect. I'll just sort of touch on that first of all. And I think, Nick, I kind of agree with your points there. A lot of, I suppose, technology drivers in manufacturing kind of come out of health and safety, kind of bedded in that health and safety. And we're sort of seeing that kind of evolution, aren't we? We're looking at sort of visual detection in terms of manufacturing environments. And the use of PPE's changed, right, as well. It used to be the hard hats, and it still is all those kinds of things, but we're now seeing different types of PPE in the production line to enforce distance working and, where people can go and who people can collaborate with. I think if you sort of couple that with the kind of war on talent, there's a real sort of skill shortage, but an opportunity for the UK as well. Warren mentioned this kind of competitive edge through skilling, and I'm sure we'll pick up on that later on, Katherine. If you sort of couple those, there's a real drive towards different ways of working, the use of automation, the use of kind of collaborative automation as well with the workforce. I think as well, sort of different level of the workforce is the kind of hybrid nature of the environment is changing as well. And we've sort of seen that, haven't we? We've seen the collaboration backbones that are being put in place to kind of support engineers working from home, collaborating with product designers. So we're seeing actually a real kind of, I suppose, energized way and a collaborative, multidisciplinary way of working that's kind of been sort of catalyzed really with the sort of conditions we've kind of met. So we're really seeing that kind of idea of that collaborative backbone and different ways of working and sharing information, right from product design for manufacture and manufacture. So I think we're really seeing that kind of being accelerated really with technologies like immersive capabilities. We mentioned the ventilation. I'm sure we'll pick up on that where we use immersive technologies to kind of really accelerate the kind of learning and the operating model part around it. So, a little bit there about the workforce workplace. I think resilience is super important, right? We all know this. And we've seen the stresses, around the globe, whether or not you're a manufacturer in life sciences doing extremely well, but you can't keep up with demand. So there's all sorts of stresses and strains on the supply chain. So resilience is so fundamental. And certainly in my current role, but in my previous role at the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, we were doing so much work on using simulation capabilities, using AI, machine learning, and simulation capabilities to start to look at predictions and start to make decisions, if you like, and validate those decisions really around, I suppose, agility in the supply chain. So there's massive change in terms of resilience and the operations around that. And I think supply chain and worker resilience is kind of key parts of that one. But, we're also seeing, the not just the green shoots of opportunity, but massive opportunity. I think Andrew, spoke to this, and Warren spoke to the opportunities we've got, globally, but UK on a global stage as well. That kind of renewed growth approach that we've got. And I think we've already touched on it. That kind of enabling continuous change is so important to kind of capitalize on that. Andrew, you mentioned the kind of idea of it's not just about a set of products, it's actually about responding to that kind of consumer demand, that batch size of one. There's massive opportunity in that kind of space. And actually, that's just the consumer angle. If you think of programs like Tempest, for example, it's going to be a wholly different model with the way the platform's created and the way it's customized. It's kind of like doing the same with 50% less kind of cost, at 50% in terms of reduction of speed. So there's massive opportunity, but it really requires that kind of organizational agility. So there's quite a lot there to sort of take on, actually. But if we sort of look at some of the data points that we've already seen, we've seen that organizations that have really invested not just in technology, but I think, Andrew, you mentioned that kind of mindset thing, and I know Nick referred to as well that kind of cultural leadership perspective. So I think organizations that are kind of acquisitive in terms of knowledge, that have started to go out there and try things out, are probably faring better. They've mobilized the workforce, they're getting a bit more resilient to change. And there's some really good examples, isn't there, about collaboration platforms that are really kind of hybrid workforce ready. Things like automation and kind of vision systems with analytics on the production shop floor has meant we can get to quality quicker, maybe with less people on the production line as well. So I think we're already seeing some of those examples and data points. And actually another observation, we've sort of touched on it, is that the speed to deploy is changing massively. We mentioned the ventilator. It's a bit of a poster project, that, isn't it? But I've seen lots of projects where collaboration platforms have been deployed in days rather than weeks and months. Where capabilities around using, augmented reality, immersive technologies have been deployed on the factory line again in days, where we can train operators up really, really quickly and start to, virtually commission operations and the operational kind of training around them in days again. So I think the sort of key point for all organizations, big, small, is that you don't need to have super deep pockets. You can learn from the best. You can learn from what's going on. But we can really kind of accelerate that adoption and sort of change, if you like. And then just a couple of key points if I want to, and I'll finish and hand back to you, Katherine, as well. And I think we've already touched on this. We can get we can get into the sort of shiny POC land. And actually, there's a lot of, the world's full of POCs as well, right? Proof of concepts and proof of values. But we really need to think about, the kind of cross-process, kind of cross-function, cross-business unit application to start to see the value. So there are certainly challenges in that kind of integrated world that we need to think about, the sort of security posture that we need to think about, and how we kind of deploy things kind of quickly. But the good news is that we can do it. There's a lot of things like cloud capabilities that are becoming much more, I suppose, accepted in manufacturing as well, that we can deploy quickly. So, I think there's some key points there. But with that, and I'm sure we'll get into some of those points and some of the overcomingness of those challenges in a bit. But I'm going to hand back to you, Katherine. I'm quite passionate about this subject.
Thank you, Barry. Well, the workforce skills work is absolutely key, and something I know the Catapult are keen to deepen our collaboration on. Andrew, back to you. Is there a digital life after robots?
Yeah, I mean, what I didn't say overtly, but I think it was meant in my presentation, is we've taken our business in Congleton from 80 million, and this year we're going to be doing 110 million. So the workforce it's all about redeployment, I think, to the more interesting roles. And actually, Andrew talked about, getting that transparency, and he's exactly right, building that transparency so you can become more lean with your automation. So, you think about a good example would be if you take one of our robot applications, what happens if it doesn't work, if it stops? My guidance is, well, you can't stop. You can't just not make anything for the rest of the day. We need our operators to be able to fault find and diagnose and do simple things. You take your own PC. If you have certain things, you switch it on and off. You try and sort it out before you call for someone to help if you can't do that. And in the same way, what we're seeing with our operators is we're upskilling our operators to work with automation. And I think a really important point is, I think Barry or Andrew touched on it. If you talk about true collaboration with automation and people, it's basically not happening at the moment. So you've got zonal approaches where health and safety is the key driver, where you've got operators working with automation in the same areas but not at the same time. The true opportunities for automation is true collaboration, and there's still a lot of work to do on that. And I think probably that will perhaps come with legislation and regulation as well, because those standards are simply, they're being made as we speak, and you know, as you all know, unfortunately, quite often it takes an event to bring that into focus. So I think there is life after robots, and I think, you know, I've said in various speeches I've made, you know, I wish I'd come into manufacturing now, not, you know, in the late 80s when I sort of, when Andrew and I were, you know, it was pretty dark. Manufacturing was, we had a couple of dark decades, and
Yeah.
you know, coming into it now, there's just never been a better time. And the UK, with again your organisation, Katherine, it's never been better placed to go on this journey. So I'm super passionate about this this topic.
Thank you. Nick, I know you touched a bit on how data is being used at Tata, but I wondered if you could give some more examples, because I think an organisation like you, it is a bit of an enigma to some people, as you say, when you drive down the M4, you wonder what's going on. But it'd be really interesting to hear a little bit more sort of examples and case studies, if that's okay, Nick.
Yeah, so try and give a couple of examples, I guess. Firstly, the point that Andrew made earlier about breaking out of silos. So one of the things that we've seen, we've always had a good handle on data because of the process control piece, because of the nature of the lines and the intensity of data. It's a very technically, physically intensive product that we're making, so it generates a lot of data and requires a lot of feedback to make sure we have control of processes, etc. What we found as we developed, we opted to use Microsoft Azure as our kind of big data platform. And as Barry referred to, there's plenty of options out there in terms of cloud support, etc. So we settled on the Azure one as a sort of startup area, because we were able to upload the data sets and essentially democratize the data, so you could enable the data to be shared more easily and more freely between the teams. We could connect different parts of the plant more effectively. And so we began to work on sort of things like digital twin capability for our sinter plant, but our analysis and our data and analytics, which is focused mainly on the heavy end, the heavy end for the iron and steel making area at Port Talbot, that has our largest kind of aspect in terms of the impact of cost. Warren referred to the kind of global cycle of commodity prices a little earlier, and we've seen that in coal and iron ore recently. So if we can make very small gains on yields, which is what our analytics teams have been focused on, it has a big lever in terms of our cost base and our ability then to make profit. So our data and analytics teams, in fact, probably at the moment have more use cases than the team can deal with. So then it's a question about how do you scale up that team and how do you employ partners to help us with that. And we do with people like TCS, etc. So we've focused on data in the supply chain, essentially, so that the heavy end can optimize its throughput, improve yield, improve quality, and then feed that back into the mix of materials that we take from around the world, because obviously we're bringing in coal and iron ore from different parts of the world. We can then look at the value and use of those materials in even more detail than the models that were developed in the 2000s and the 1990s and the 1980s. We just got more insight, more history, and more confidence. Barry said about predictions in the supply chain. So we know all forecasts are wrong, kind of thing. But if we can use that data, we can begin to predict different scenarios, and we can get those scenarios down to a couple, then that helps us again. And again, value in use modeling continues to develop really positively on the data and analytics. On the other end of the scale, of course, it's also about customers at the end of the day. I'm not sure I fully agree with the kind of customization of one, because in customization of one for steel is huge. That's a massive challenge, kind of thing. So there has to be some points of standardization and some points of scale, because we still need scale to operate efficiently to some extent. One of the first use case areas we had with the data and analytics was actually in sales forecasting. We built various models to look at the quality of our forecasting and the time when the sales team would hand back, as it were, sales that they're not going to make, or extra sales that they do want to make, and what point in the quarter. Whilst we have continuous manufacturing 24/7, you still have to operate with lead times. You've got a natural lead time for the whole steel process to be done. If you're taking out pre-painted steels or tube products, etc., they have to move around the country. So you have a certain number of weeks, and typically you're operating in quarters. With the analytics model, we found tens of millions of difference. Not necessarily by saying, okay, that prediction is definitely wrong. That wasn't the aim of it. It wasn't a kind of target the worst salesman. It was understand, can we improve by 1 week or 2 weeks the time when you say, I need more or I need less capacity? Those couple of weeks then allowed us to say we can sell that capacity elsewhere at a second preferential market as opposed to a fifth preferential market, and the price difference was enormous. And that's the kind of thing that where we've seen, the ability then to put lots of data together, make the life easier with the sales teams as well, because we use the predictive analytics capability that we learned. We took all the forecasts over several quarters, and we helped the model to understand how things worked. So when sales teams were forecasting, the model would instantly say, yeah, but that's Christmas. Yeah, because forecasting is quite a hard task. You're doing it for many weeks with many product lines. We don't have 50,000, Andrew, I think you mentioned. We probably don't have 50,000 product lines, but we do have a lot of product lines. Yeah. So one sales guy trying to predict, I can't imagine how Siemens can have a meeting where you say, okay, predict what you're going to sell in the next 6 months on 80,000 product lines, and so we had that challenge. So we used the model to improve our value, and we used the model to make the life easier for the sales teams and the customer service teams. So that was a kind of the other end of the scale, the kind of consequence end, Katherine, of some of that. And the rest of our analytics is then based around what we'll do with the procurement teams. That's the next area as well, with the procurement teams to look at total cost of ownership and look at the spend analytics to help in the sourcing processes as well. So that's what I love about manufacturing. There's so much going on. There's a physicality, but it's all the support activities that are required to drive it as well.
And considering that we all managed to keep going to a certain extent during the pandemic, it just shows the resilience as well. Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Barry, you touched on this in your earlier comments about adoption challenges, but I think maybe you can maybe have a few more examples. I know you're now in the consultancy world, and will people listen to you? That's the question. They will. Perhaps you could.
Yeah, I hope so, Katherine. I hope so. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Adoption. We spoke about great examples from Rolls-Royce and Siemens and Tata. So obviously, adoption's happening, right? I mean, but I think we need to kind of get, build the pace up. I think there are different sorts of adoption challenges. If you're an SME, for example, it's a slightly different sort of challenge and landscape. You can't afford to, we talk about in agile terms. I think Nick mentioned sort of agile cultures. There's a think big, start small, kind of fail fast, sort of mentality. If you're an SME, for example, you maybe can't afford to fail at all, right? So you need to kind of mitigate that sort of risk. So I think there's an adoption challenges at all sorts of scales here, really. Bringing on some examples from an SME, and I know there's a lot of SMEs in Wales around aerospace and automotive and some of the new emerging kind of energy industries, as greener energy industries as well. There are ways to kind of mitigate things. So I would suggest that people, kind of really raise their awareness. There's a lot of people and maybe at pilot stage, and they need to kind of scale. So it's really, how do we look beyond the kind of current function and business unit and process? And there are people who are just getting aware and trying things out. So I'm going to give you a plug, Katherine here, the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. I know when I was working there, we were working with Made Smarter, which is a UK program. And in fact, with my parent company, Accenture, we were also working into Made Smarter. But one of the key sort of things that's happening at the moment is test beds. So actually, we probably need more test beds as well, where people can try the use cases out, and actually technology companies, we want to stimulate, growth in terms of jobs. So we want to encourage startups and new breeds of technology companies to work alongside the Siemens or the Microsofts to kind of build new solutions. So this testbed program is really fundamental, actually. It really kind of helps organizations try things out. So if you're an end user, you can try your use case out in a real manufacturing environment. If you're a technology provider, you can try out pre-production capabilities in a manufacturing environment. So it feels to me there are ways of mitigating risks and there are ways of jumping on board and adopting. But I think at the heart of it, you do need to make investments at some point in time. And I'd really start to encourage people to think of that kind of core. We've kind of alluded to it, where you've got this sort of IoT data kind of platform that's integrated with your enterprise systems. And that is a challenge. That integration is a challenge. But there are architectures, there are microservice architectures out there that kind of really enable that interoperability and integration. So I think from a technology stack point of view, we're kind of seeing that. I think the try before you buy, we're kind of really sort of seeing that being helped and alleviated by organizations like that, high value manufacturing catapult. But I would encourage, anybody out there to just tap into their ecosystem, because it is all about the ecosystem, right? We're solving these problems. And Andrew, kind of gave out a call to arms, come and see us in Congleton, a great facility up there. So I just encourage people to go out there and tap into that ecosystem, along with Avanade as well there, about how do we do things? Where do we go next? What's this digital core thing? What are my integration challenges? And how do I help with the skilling as well? Certainly, Avanade, we're working with University of Wales, Trinity St David's actually at the moment. And I know there's a lot of associations like AMRC with Sheffield. So I think we're seeing a lot more of that academia, industry, technology kind of coupling together in sort of clusters. And I think really kind of powering the skills economy as well. So I think we're seeing that, that kind of tail, if you like, of skills into the workforce and that, raising competition. But immediately we don't have to be constrained. We can go out there, tap into experience, tap into the test beds and really push past those adoption challenges.
Yeah, Katherine, sorry, just to come back on that. There's you asked about our examples. I should have mentioned, of course, we also have we also used big data analytics to create an IoT platform, and it's triggered me when Barry talked about different platforms. The platform approach is one of the things that's helped us to get scale, because, and I don't know how it's worked at Siemens particularly, but individuals were coming up with ideas for IoT type automation and sensors, but the cost of the sensor, actually some of them came from Siemens, was £55, but the cost of implementing it, so getting it on site, installing it, getting it power, connecting it to the network, and then adding a data source, suddenly the project was £50,000. So you couldn't scale that kind of thing, it just wouldn't work. And if you can find platforms, you get repeatability and scalability, and the sort of total cost just drops through the floor. And there's a lot of work that we're doing on backbone stuff, platform technology platforms, network connections, LoRaWAN connections, all those kinds of things, to be the enablers as well. And so if you can find anything in the platform, is it external, internal, however it's coming in, that is a key route to accelerating the scale up. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it really triggered me, Barry, on that example.
No, well, it's a great point example, Nick, at Tata Steel, right?
Yeah, I think a good, for those people on the call, a good use case for those is the elimination of paper, because that is a proxy for fragmented non-platform systems. And I've been to only a couple of factories globally that have got close to doing that. So if you think about the elimination of paper as a proxy for creating a seamless platform, that's not a bad way to think about it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think while Katherine's coming up, I totally understand where you're coming from there, Andrew. Yeah, that's a big driver, isn't it? Yeah.
Thank you. One thing I wanted to move on to now, and obviously this is a big topic with the government and the global mindset that we obviously have in the UK is the question of security. I don't wish you to have to sort of share too much about any company confidential matters, but just digital and the safety and security of the digital world. I just wondered if you wanted to comment on that, and maybe start off with Andrew.
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Katherine. And what I can tell you I've learned most over the last 2 years is the importance of a resilient cyber secure location. And I can tell you that the learning has been very often by putting in a connection to a supplier where you want to collaborate, and as Andrew said, you start to share data to improve your forecasts, but then you realize that that connection is not secure, and then you need to put in a holistic sort of security concept. And I can tell you at least 50% of the challenge of this connected data is doing it in a secure environment. And I mean, 3 years ago in Siemens Congleton, 500 people, we didn't have a cyber security function as such. It was integrated into IT. Today, 3 years on, we've got 5 people in a standalone cyber security function, and they're adding huge value. So what I can tell you is that the rate of learning around this topic has been immense, and I think it's probably something that'll be even greater as we try and get more connected outside of our own organizations. And the whole sort of SME landscape is an interesting one, because a bit like Siemens Congleton, we had machines that were 10, 15 years old with old Windows or IT systems, which are not in principle easily protectable, other than designing security concepts to stop anybody putting in USBs or contractors coming to site and upgrading. So it's very much about holistic. What are we trying to do? What's the risk of our data? Who's going to get the data? And then mixing that as well with the physical security concepts. But it's a great question. We're on the road to learning at the moment, and being curious and getting involved in this type of thing is key. But yeah, we're running amongst it.
Yeah, thank you. And Nick, I can imagine your global company you work for, it's something very much top of your mind in your role as well.
It certainly is, and we have a top 10 security program actually running at the moment to help people focus on the issues. Interesting you say global, Katherine, though. Actually, a lot of the larger number of security issues and security risks are very local, and they're local not just to, say, a site like Lamworn or something, but they're local to a building or to an office area, because the number of devices that we're now connecting, the number of connection points that we've got, we have more partners and more suppliers that are keen to monitor their equipment in situ. So then you're saying, okay, well, how's that connection going to work? Are you having your own connection? Are you using a 4G connection? Do you want access to our network, etc.? And just the volume, I think, as Andrew was referring to, just the volume of demand is enormous. And therefore, you're having to say, okay, well, how am I going to do that? And there's this constant pressure to say, well, just get it connected, just do it, kind of thing. But I'm pretty certain those days are definitely behind us. And the incidents of ransomware we've seen recently in the US, but with the oil piece, the medical situation, the health service in Ireland, etc., they demonstrate that this is a real risk. This is not something that might just happen. You can get ransomware as a service these days. You don't need to be clever on how to do it. You just need to know where to buy it. So if all companies are at risk of ransomware as a service, then everybody's going to take that cyber piece very, very seriously. We've kind of set up groups, and we've got people that look at the kind of different levels that we've got, and we also work closely with our partners, particularly in network. We mentioned before, connectivity is central to the kind of digital enablement, which supports the kind of manufacturing of the future. So we're relying on not only our internal capabilities, but external partners to come forward and to bring us solutions in the security space as well. But it's it's absolutely top of the list, I can assure you.
Thank you. Just a reminder for people listening in, if you wanted to ask any questions, we'll be wrapping up in about 4 minutes. Barry, do your new clients come to you on questions about security? What do you advise them? I know you've got experience from this when you were at MTC as well with some of the defence work, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I can only agree with the guys, right? It's got to be a broad thing, hasn't it? Security's got to be a broad thing. And the sort of terminology we use is that, digital sort of changes your security posture, right? You're kind of introducing different ways into the physical. We talk about the operational technology and the physical, meeting the IT and the digital technology. So your posture has changed, right? And it's you've exposed more vulnerabilities, right? So it's absolutely a board decision. It can't just be the IT department, talking about it. So we're definitely seeing, like I say, the vulnerabilities have changed. Well, in my previous role, Katherine, but certainly in my current role, we're not just talking to the IT department. It's a different persona conversation. We're talking and educating, engineers and product and production people, and IT people. It's got to be a PAN policy, and there's got to be solutions that are kind of, can be enforced there. I mean, coming from a company that delivers sort of cloud technologies, I think there's this kind of theory, if you like, well, if it's in the cloud, it's got to be a real problem, and we can't do that. And I think there has been resistance from manufacturers maybe to kind of go down that route for different things like export control, maybe if you're a defense contractor. But I think there are solutions out there. It's a people, process, technology thing. Even with cloud, you can be kind of quite clear about where your data still resides. It's not just up in the cloud. We can be clear about policies and where things reside, etc. So the good thing is there are solutions. It's a board decision. It's a PAN kind of function consideration, not just IT as well. But back to my previous point about challenges, this is a challenge and a barrier for sure, but there's lots of help kind of out there as well. And kind of interestingly, I mentioned the test beds before. I know AMRC, Katherine, up in Sheffield, the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, they're creating a test bed with cyber security in mind as well. So people can see these things and generate awareness, and particularly if you're maybe an SME where you're not used to this kind of world there, I think that awareness and inquisitiveness and, exercising the ecosystem is so important.
Yeah, Barry, I was just going to say, I think another proxy, in my opinion, for SMEs is if you accept that you will get penetrated because there's just so many attacks, a really good target condition for SMEs is the state of their backup data, state of their backup systems. I speak to a lot of companies, and when I ask them, how do you back up? What do you back up? What's the frequency? It goes a bit quiet. So it's about getting some, basics in place as well that I think can go a long way.
I mean, luckily on that one, Andy, luckily there's assessments. I mean, we're not the only company to provide security assessments, but there's lots of assessments that really kind of cover all those elements and actually apply it depending on your context and size, how many production facilities you've got. It's all applied, isn't it? But I think, there are those kind of assessments out there. And I would actually really advocate having that kind of thing. And you can work on a plan then, can't you? Risk-based approach to that plan and its implementation.
Okay, well, I just wanted to sort of maybe draw a few conclusions here. I found it fascinating to hear the challenges that you face in your individual organisations. Thank you for the shout outs for the catapult, which is very kind and a big opportunity, I know, for us as a nation to work together. The other thing I quickly want to mention is I also have the honour of chairing the newest economic powerhouse for the UK, which is Western Gateway, which encompasses South Wales and the west of England. And cyber expertise is something we're really strong on in this area, and very happy to be working with Welsh partners on that. Just to say, Andrew, you said you're from Congleton, but of course there's also the Mersey Alliance evolving as well, with the North West and North Wales. So Warren mentioned levelling up on a global basis, and digital absolutely is a global
I live in North Wales, by the way.
Oh, fantastic.
Born in St.
I just want to
Tata.
say thank you. I want to say thank you to all of you for joining today, for the effort you put into, Andrew, in your presentation and your very thoughtful comments, and best wishes to your organisations. And it's a big, exciting world out there. So thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katherine, as well. Thanks all.
And if
Thanks.
people want to hear more, there's at 1:45, there's a special session that Tata Steel's holding on technology in Tata Steel. So please do join the team for that.
Thank
Actually,
you.
we've got an innovation session at 3 o'clock. Apologies, I didn't mention that. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for watching. Rewatch all of our sessions online. Thank you to our partners.